Welcome to Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined today by Christine Scott-Hayward. She's a professor at Cal State Long Beach, but she will be spending the year in Washington, D.C. as a Supreme Court fellow, looking at the question of prisons and sentencing. And I want to speak with you broadly first before we kind of drill down about the question of prisons in America. We know that the United States has the largest prison population in the world. 2.3 million folks are incarcerated at some level in the United States. Is it fair to say we have the largest prison population and therefore there's an issue?
Yeah, I think it is fair. If you look at it proportionally, there was a study done by the Pew Public Safety Performance Project a few years ago that came up with that statistic: 1 in 100 adults in America are in prison. And so yes, if you compare our crime rate with the crime rates of other countries, we don't have that different crime rates, and yet we have this vastly disproportionate number of people that are in prison.
And it would seem that one of the significant factors driving that was this push to kind of get tough on crime. We saw in the 1980s, 1990s, measures passed by the voters, measures passed by the legislatures throughout states, as well as the United States Congress, to increase sentences, to create mandatory sentencing. How has that played into this issue?
Well, that's played a major role, but there's also another aspect that's been brought to light lately, which is the role of prosecutors. And so it's up to the prosecutors to decide what they're going to charge defendants with. And so they didn't have to charge them with the offenses for which there were mandatory sentences, and yet many did. So John Pfaff, who's a researcher at Fordham, has been doing a lot of studying of this issue lately, and sort of he is a little skeptical of the reform movements that are out there. Many of them focus on the federal system, but the federal system is much smaller, obviously, than the state system. And so changes that could be made through the legislation that's pending in Congress right now might not have that big of an effect.
But let's talk about the federal conversation.
Sure.
Because I think it's undeniable that folks, not only on the left, but on the right, are looking at questions of criminal justice reform and are looking at the question of mandatory sentencing and looking at the question of disproportionate sentences between powder cocaine and rock cocaine and those issues. To me, Professor, this seems like a sea change. I mean,
that they're actually talking about it.
That they're talking about it, and that folks on the right are talking about it.
Absolutely. I mean, the Smart on Crime, which is sort of the initiative that's being developed by folks on the right, and the fact that we actually are having a conversation about criminal justice in a presidential election. I mean, I can't remember the last time criminal justice was actually a topic in a presidential election. The changes that are being, the conversations are great, obviously, right? And there is a need to have these conversations. We need to have them more at a local level.
So let's talk about that, because here in California, we have AB 109, which is that prison realignment, requiring us to decrease the size of our prison population because of a Supreme Court order. We have Prop 47, which reclassified certain offenses from felonies to misdemeanors. The public seems a little schizophrenic on it. I mean, on the one hand, Prop 47 passed overwhelmingly. On the other, you have many folks saying, we're seeing spikes in crime. It's because of AB 109. It's because of Prop 47. I don't know if there's causality.
We don't know yet. It's too early to tell. And so there was a publication that I read recently. I think it came out of the Stanford program there that sort of said, across the board, there really hasn't been, we really can't draw a straight line. There have been spikes. There have been spikes all over the country.
And that's something to consider, is it's not just in California.
But the relationship between crime rate and prison, it has never been shown to be a direct one.
And what I find fascinating, and you can help me with this hopefully, I've been covering crime for a decade or two. Generally speaking, as I had remembered, when the economy got bad, crime would go up. When the economy got good, crime would go down.
That is one of the factors,
But we've seen the exact opposite. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's such a complex area, and there's so much going on at different levels, in different states and different localities. I mean, we think about it. We're here in LA County. There's so many different laws. There's so many different actors that are governing who is in jail and who is in prison in Southern California. And then if you compare that, then all the
Extrapolate.
different exactly extrapolate it to the different states, the different countries. There is no clear picture of what's driving. We don't know exactly what drives the crime rate, right? There are a bunch of different factors, and we don't know exactly what drives the prison rate. Again, there are many different factors.
And let's talk about what's known as the school to prison pipeline,
Yes.
this era of mass incarceration.
Right.
We see lots of magazine covers about how black men in America are going from school to prison.
Right.
I mean, they don't go to school to college. And
Right.
so are those statistics fair? I mean, is there a question?
So there's this statistics that's thrown out there that there are more black men in prison than there are in college. That's not true. It's not true. It's thrown out there a lot.
Okay.
It's something to be worried about. There are certainly
Fair
too many
enough.
black men in prison, obviously, but there are more black men in college than there are in
Okay.
prison, and that's something that's been recently
Right.
debunked. But the school to prison pipeline is there. I mean, the things that we used to resolve within the school fights,
Right.
they're not resolved within the school anymore. Public safety officers are called. People are going to juvenile hall, they're being arrested. They're going to have to go to court for things that traditionally would be handled within the school. We see suspensions in preschool now. And if you
Right.
look at the number of suspensions, it's young black kids that are being suspended at preschool and kindergarten.
And that really begs the question, do we still face societal mores that treat students of color differently than, let's say, Anglo students?
I mean, I don't know about the students, right? My expertise is in the criminal justice
we'll talk
area,
about that.
but there is systemic discrimination in the criminal justice system, whether it's conscious or
Right.
unconscious.
So let's talk about your fellowship, which is very exciting. I
Yes,
used
it
to be
is.
a lawyer. I went to law school at George Washington. So I lived in
Excellent.
D.C. I know D.C. well, the Supreme
my
Court.
first time there, so it'll be
Okay,
interesting.
so what are you looking to study?
So the fellowship gives me the opportunity to work in the United States Sentencing Commission. I will do work for them on their various projects. They have priorities that they're going to be studying over the next year. I don't exactly know
don't
what
know
I'm
yet,
going to be
right,
working
right.
on. And then I will be supported to write a research paper. Which
Do you know what that will be on?
It'll probably be on the area of supervised release, which is something that I've studied before, which is this sort of small area of federal sentencing that hasn't really been looked at that much, but has strong implications.
But supervised release is an issue here in California as well.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of questions about whether supervised release can be more effectively used. We have ankle bracelets, for example, halfway houses.
Right. And my take on
Please.
the matter is, and we don't actually have a huge amount of research, unfortunately, but the research that we do have doesn't indicate that there are more positive outcomes for people released on supervised release.
Really?
So if you were, or parole, so if you were to release the same group of people and just release them back into the community versus giving them supervised release or parole, which serves two functions, right? It's supposed to rehabilitate, help reintegrate into the society, and it's also supposed to protect public safety,
Right.
reduce recidivism. We don't have much data that shows that it does either of those things,
and
and yet
when-
we spend a ton of money on it.
And when you say supervised release, what that means is you have to report.
Exactly. You have to report in. You have a huge swath of conditions that you have to comply with, conditions that most of us would not be able to comply with on an everyday
and
basis.
we talk about criminal justice reform. I mean, think about how many people have been sprung right back into the
Right.
prison system because, like you had
Yeah.
suggested, the conditions are so onerous. I mean,
Right.
forget drug use. They
Right.
miss an appointment. They're late for an appointment.
Yeah, I mean, you have to report. When I did my dissertation research was with people who were on parole in New York and talking about sort of how the institution of parole helped them with their reentry. And I heard from a number of different people that some parole officers were not flexible when it came to reporting and work. So they would have to report on a certain day, and yet they had to go to work. And so how are they supposed to keep their job, which is a condition of their parole, while also having to show up? There are some great parole officers out there, some great probation and supervision officers, but it's sort of set up where you have this dual function. On the one hand, you're supposed to help them, and on the other hand, you're supposed to be you have the stick and you're supposed to be keeping them on track. And how do you do those two things at the same time?
Will you come back after your fellowship and report?
Sure,
I want to hear about
absolutely.
it. Her
Yeah.
name is Christine Scott-Hayward. She is a professor at Cal State Long Beach. She's on her way to Washington, D.C. as part of a Supreme Court fellowship looking at sentencing in the United States. My name is Brad Pomerance, coming to you from Signal Hill, Charter Local Edition.